Welcome to Deep Work Out Loud, the thinking that fuels our life, our work, and our leadership. I'm Julie Harris Oliver. This is the podcast where I sit with another professional coach and we do some work around a single concept, a piece of inspiration, a topic we've seen come up in our coaching, something we're reading, something we're thinking about. And if we're really lucky, while we're talking about it, we might demonstrate what coaching might look and feel like, but we'll see how this goes. It is still all an experiment. With any luck, you will leave with something you can apply and use in your work or your life or both. Today, I'm here with Dr. Mike Shea. Mike is an executive coach who graduated from the Hudson Institute in Santa Barbara. He specializes in transition and transformation work with clients. He has 20 years of experience as a pulmonary and critical care physician, as well as 10 years working in physician and hospital leadership. Originally from the Boston area, he currently resides in Hawaii. Hi, Mike.
Aloha, Julie. How are you?
Aloha. Now, before we dig in, why don't we talk about what was your journey to becoming a coach?
I started with mentorship throughout my career in medicine. I had the opportunity to teach med students and residents, and there's something really exciting about taking what you've learned, passing it on to other people, and watching the lights come on as they figure things out and helping them on their journey. I then went into leadership, hospital leadership, about 10 years ago, culminating in a 5-year stint as chief medical officer in the health system that I work in. And doing some leadership development courses and being on the receiving end of that, again, got me really excited about being able to pass that on to other people. And working with an executive coach, with our executive team, the coach actually said, "You'd be really good at this. You should give it a try." And so I decided that it would be a great late career transition to shift over to work as a coach as opposed to taking night call into my 60s. So I attend in the Hudson Institute and it's been a great fit. And so I do coach folks in healthcare, but I like to coach beyond healthcare as well, because I find the things that we face really do cross from one industry to the other, because we're all human beings and we tend to face the same challenges.
It really does, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
Now, what did you bring for us to dig into today?
It's a topic that's been front and center for me over the last couple of years. How relationships with our parents really manifest in our day-to-day work life, and specifically around estrangement. I was estranged from my father for several years. So I think it's a really rich and deep topic that we can dig into, and let's explore and see what we can find.
Sounds fun. Okay. What brought this front of mind for you?
So for the last, it's been probably 5 years, I've been estranged from my dad. I'll give a little background. My home life growing up was pretty normal on the outside, mom and dad, middle class home outside of Boston. We got to take vacations. We were financially comfortable, and my parents are both loving, but they had their own demons. And I say this retrospectively. I certainly didn't understand it when I was a kid. Nobody's perfect. I've heard people say that, when you're a parent, it's really trying to figure out which things you're going to let your kids have to go to therapy for when they grow up. Like, everybody comes out with something. But my
Because
parents,
there's going to be something.
Yeah. But my parents did the very best they could with what they were dealt. And, they had their own stuff. And then, there's the normal human development piece of you become a teenager, you go to college, your parents know nothing, they're fools, and you're out to take over the world. And then there was some natural separation from both parents. And then as I got older and wiser and got some more life experience, I realized that they, in fact, were kind and loving people that I had something in common with. And, we kind of came back together. It was only later in life where it seemed like, I think it was just the work that I had done on myself. I started to understand that I really didn't want to tolerate people treating me in negative ways. People being sarcastic and rude and demeaning, and I have decided not to accept that in people in my life. And it became obvious the only person still behaving that way towards me was my father. And I tried to have some conversation with him about it, and he really didn't seem to comprehend where I was coming from. And then, with the help of therapists, wrote a letter, refined it so none of it was pointing fingers or blaming, but really just saying, like, hey, this is the way I like to be treated. When I hear you say this, it doesn't feel very good. I'd like to continue having a relationship with you, but I really like to ask you to change how you treat me. And he couldn't hear it, whether he couldn't comprehend it or he just couldn't hear it. We were never able to get past that. So we didn't talk really for 5 years. Over last summer, he became ill and ultimately passed away. And so all of the grief around that and digging into the grieving process and really looking back and seeing how now that relationship is gone, how much that relationship influenced my relationship with others, particularly male authority figures at work. So I thought that would be a good place to talk today.
Wow. Where do we even begin to unpack? I will say the caveat that I am not a therapist, and we're not going to look at this from a therapeutic lens. We're going to try to look at this from a coaching perspective, which is really more than looking to the past, looking to the future and how that might affect future behavior and how that has, as you said, affected your relationships at work and your working relationships. So where would you like to kind of start to unpack it?
Let's talk about how my relationship with my dad affected my relationships with male bosses at work, because I think that really is a strong coaching perspective.
Sure.
And from Hudson, we believe that self as coach is a really important thing, and that my coaching skills are rooted in the fact that I do the work myself and that I have come to understandings that I can then help others come to their own understanding in the same kind of ways. So I found myself I've had seven, male authority figures in the last 10 years in my various leadership positions. And I always found those relationships tense, the exception of maybe one. And in looking back, it was because I was looking for them to validate me.
Mm-hmm.
So I grew up trying to get the validation through achievement, which certainly helped me get through med school. But as an executive, I would do my job and I wasn't satisfied until I got positive feedback saying that I had done a good job. And even when I got that, it seemed that the effect would only last for a short period of time. And when I looked back at the track record, the work was always done, the work was always there. And yet internally, I was still feeling not validated, not appreciated, not seen, which was really the lens through which I grew up. It was only when I started to appreciate that I was able to be present in the moment and recognize when those feelings started to come up. And that's where somatics would come into play. Like I might feel a little anxious, a little tense in my shoulders. I might feel a little fluttering in my gut that people might call anxiety. And I'd be looking across the desk to the boss to be like to tell me like you're good, you're okay. And number one, it was unsettling for me. But number two, it was unsettling for them because they're just trying to tell their, direct report what to do and get you ready, get the project done and get on to the next crisis or the next project that needs to
Right.
be done. And there was just a whole lot of extra emotional baggage that I was
Because
bringing.
like I said, you did a good job. What?
Right. Right.
Why are you still here?
I told you last week you did a good job on this. Like, why are we still talking about this? I don't get
Yeah.
it.
So what kind of work did you do to start to notice, oh, this need for feedback is different from what one typically would need from feedback at work?
The foundational work for me was in therapy. So again, I think as a coach, I often recommend that my clients have either a therapy background or are actively engaged in therapy. Because I think coaching, we really do sometimes, as we're digging around, we unearth things that are beyond our scope.
Mm-hmm.
And it's nice to have clients be willing and open to do that deeper exploration where you can really understand where those things are coming from. But from our perspective as coaches, we want to be able to help our clients recognize in the moment something seems out of proportion. Why am I sitting in this office talking about a routine project, feeling highly anxious, feeling like my well being is hinging on whether or not the person across from me smiles and says, great job, or, you know, maybe doesn't smile and says, could have been better, or we're going to have to, go back to the drawing board. Why is my self esteem and well being wrapped up in a work interaction like that?
And what's being triggered in you that perhaps has nothing to do with what just happened in this room.
Exactly. Exactly.
I had an incident like this at work once where it's embarrassing to talk about because it was not my best moment. I got so angry in a meeting that I kind of lost my shit. Unfortunately, the CEO and every top executive was in that room.
Mm.
And I walked out of there and went straight to therapy and was like, what is wrong with me? I need to be able to keep it together in these meetings. And she used that phrase, if it's hysterical, it's historical.
It was on my mind. I was going to say that.
Yeah, here we are.
Yep, exactly.
So that can be a good indicator that that's actually a topic for therapy.
Yeah. And I think teaching clients about somatics, really understanding what are the sensations happening in our bodies and how are we interpreting them.
Mm-hmm.
Because I don't know, I grew up as a child of the 70s and 80s. They didn't do a whole lot of teaching about like your feelings and your emotions. I think today's younger generations are getting much better education about like what's going on, what am I feeling, and how do I respond to it. We did not learn emotional self-management.
I mean, we had Free to Be You and Me.
We did, and I had the record. I used to love that line.
It's all right to cry.
Yeah. We were allowed to express our emotions, but I think I've heard it expressed as a color palette. I had like the primary colors and maybe like some of the secondary ones, but I did not have the 128 pack of the Crayola crayons version of the emotional palette. Mine was definitely the 12 pack.
Hardly anybody does. I was listening to Brene Brown I was listening to her new book, Strong Ground, and she was talking about when, as part of her research, asked, thousands of people to name emotions, and most people could name 3: happy, sad, mad.
It's startling.
Yeah.
And there's so many shades in between and different, and they create different sensations in our bodies. And if we don't know what they are, we may treat them as hunger, or we may try to just suppress them. And that's one thing I've learned in therapy is the more I suppress the expression of emotion, the more it comes out sideways. Kind of like what you described in the meeting with all of the executives. That emotion just pops off and you're like, what just happened? So having some self-awareness to be able to feel what's happening and question, like, where's that coming from? Now, mind you, I'm not sitting in the CEO office doing that for the first time. Like, that's something I learned in coaching, to be able to sit and say, okay, as you think about that meeting you had with your CEO today, what did you feel? Where was it? What did it feel like? And what does it remind you of? And sort of digging around to see what things in my history resonated with it. And it was through that, then we could go to how do I manage that? Because really, at work, it's about self-management. The emotions are going to come. But if I can recognize that that emotion is related to something historical, as you pointed out, then I can say to myself, this is not something I have to manage right now. Like this, we can put that aside and let's just move forward. What I need from this meeting with my CEO for the next 10 minutes is a decision on, are we going with plan A or plan B? And detach from that emotional piece and then take the time later to be able to sort through it, called compartmentalization. Can I self-manage well enough to show up at work as my best self without having to drag all of my emotional baggage into the room?
It really is a practice. And I think historically, when the overriding management style is direction and control, and now here I'm going to quote Brene Brown again, and the only way to maintain that kind of direction and control is to use occasional cruelty. And the managers who utilize that sort of management style are often wildly unregulated
Yes.
with their emotions. And so just pop off and lose it all the time on people, which keeps everybody on edge and guessing and not really knowing what to do and certainly not bringing their best work. And
Absolutely.
so there's something about if you as a leader can regulate yourself, hold on to your emotions, be intentional about how you show up, it actually creates some safety and security for the people around you to be able to show up and do their best work.
There's some great work out there, and I'm terrible at quoting the appropriate resource, so I will apologize to the audience. But there's so much work out there on what we say is really only maybe 10% of what gets conveyed. It's our body
Mm-hmm.
language, our tone. There's so much more nonverbal communication that's happening. And we as leaders can really set the tone in a room. We often set the tone in a room before we've even opened our mouths, as soon as we walk in the door and sit down at a table. And that's another piece that's really important for coaching is creating some self-awareness in our clients about how do you present? How do you present to your peers? How do you present to your direct reports? How do they present to clients, potential clients? Because so much of it is body language. So much of it is our mannerisms, tone of voice. There's so many layers of communication that are happening that we can control, but that oftentimes we're not aware of, and that can be tripping us up.
Mm-hmm. How do you want to show up?
Exactly. And it actually,
I,
because of the mirror neurons that we have in our brains that are really helpful in human development, when we're babies, it's why when mom smiles, baby smiles. We have this unconscious desire to actually meet and mirror what we see in other human beings. And so when you come in calm and you take a big deep breath and you relax, if you watch, other people in the room will actually take a deep breath and relax. So there's actually neurons in the brain that encourage that kind of behavior. Feel free to read up on that. It's very interesting. There's a lot of work. Vanderkolk, the author of The Body Keeps Score, has some really, really amazing literature. So as we're talking about self-regulation and managing our emotions, it comes to my mind an experience I had recently, which I'd like to tell you. My father and I were estranged. I didn't know that he'd been getting sicker. He was in his 80s. He was developing early signs of Parkinsonism and had lymphoma, which he was getting treatment for.
mm,
And he'd been hospitalized after a fall at home and was declining. And a member of my family reached out because they felt I should know that he was in the hospital. And they had sent me a text on a Thursday. We'd talked on Friday, and it sounded like dad might rally, he might not. He had some, he was sick, and we knew he was a stubborn son of a gun. So we thought, well, let's just see how things go through the weekend. And so on Friday, we said, we'll touch base Monday. But I asked, send me a text if things change. And Saturday morning, I got a text that they were planning to put him on comfort care. So I then suddenly, living in Hawaii and having to try to get to Boston, that's
it's far.
no small feat. So I jumped in the car and got home and threw a bunch of things in a suitcase and booked a flight that was 90 minutes away. So from where being in my house, I had 90 minutes to get on the plane before it took off.
Mm.
And my wife drove me to the airport, and I couldn't check in because it was too close to the flight time, and I had to go to the counter. And I get to the woman, and she says, "Sir, you're too close to the flight. I'm not supposed to check you in." And previous versions of me would have started crying or yelling. It would have been anger or sadness,
Yep.
victim or, perpetrator. Like those were
And understandably so.
roles, right? Like legit, you see that every day, and most people will be like, "Yeah, like your dad's dying. Of course, you're really upset." But I had a moment of grace. Like something inside of me just said, "You know what? Just tell them what's going on." I have no control in this moment. I can't make her check me in. I can't make them hold the plane. I just got to throw myself on the mercy of strangers. And so I said, "This is what's going on. I just found out 2 hours ago that my dad's dying, and I'd really like to try to get there before he dies. I understand I may not make it. I won't hold you responsible, but all I need is a chance. And I'm just asking you to give me that chance." And she looked at me. She looked around to see if anyone was watching, and she checked me in. and she printed my boarding pass and she said, "You have 11 minutes to get to the gate. I wish you the best."
Oh, man.
Yeah, it was, and so, okay, check that box. Now I got to go through TSA, and I've got clear and I've got pre-check. So that, that really helps. And they rush me up to the x-ray machine metal detector section. And of course, time would have it, the TSA agents are swapping who's running the scanner. And so we have to wait. And so while I'm waiting, I look at the people who are in line and I'm like, I don't know, sixth in line. I said, "Hey folks, I'm just going to ask a favor. I've got to catch a flight. I've got 9 minutes to get to the gate. This is the situation. Would any of you be willing to let me go ahead of you?" And all of them were so kind. They're like, "Oh my gosh, absolutely yes. How can we help you?" And I was like, "You know what? I'll take prayers, because I don't know what other force is going to be able to make this happen. Like this is going to be tight." And then I get up to the front and the TSA agent's like, "We're not ready yet. We're flipping the scanner." And I said, "Well, I've got now 8 minutes to get to my flight." And he's like, "Well, they shouldn't have checked you in this close. You should have gotten here earlier." And again, this would have been a perfect opportunity for me to tell him, "Fuck you, you're a jerk." But I didn't. I looked at him and I said, "My dad's dying, and I found out 2 hours ago, and I'm doing the very best I can. So if you can anyway expedite me getting through, I'd appreciate it. But if you can't, I get it. I'm just asking for a chance." That was kind of my mantra. I just want a chance. And he smiled and he said, "Godspeed." And he got me through. And so I then had to run through the airport. I am not in running shape. I have not been for many years. But I jogged through the airport with my suitcase, and I heard them calling my name overhead. "This is the last and final call. Mike Shea,
I'm
please
coming.
present yourself to gate 23." And I'm like running. And I came around the corner, and the woman looked at me and she said, "Mr. Shea?" And I said, "23, going to, I was going to Vegas as the connector." And she said, "Yep." And the door was closed. She pulled out her walkie talkie, and I heard her talk to the head flight attendant and said, "Have you guys closed the plane door?" And she said, "No." She said, "Mr. Shea has joined us. Please keep the door open. I'm going to let him down." And they let me in. Whew. I get emotional telling this story, mainly because there's a lot of hard things happening in the world these days. And, for years now, the world is a hard place sometimes, but there are really good human beings out there. And I think it's always refreshing to me to see the kindness of strangers, that when you make yourself a little bit vulnerable, people meet you there. So the head flight attendant met me on the gangway and said, "Catch your breath. You've made it." And then she walked me to my seat, and I got to spend the next, 12 hours figuring out what I was going to say to my dad. And again, there were little signposts, little moments where people were just kind along the way. The person at Vegas, when I was checking in, just, saw something in my face and just said, "Looks like you're having a rough day," and was just kind. So I made it. I got to Boston at 6:30 in the morning and was able to get to the hospital at 7 o'clock. And my hope and prayer was that I'd be in the room by myself with my dad, that he wouldn't be conscious enough to be able to have a conversation. I really just wanted to say what I had to say. As a career critical care doctor, I know that even though people aren't talking, they're in the room. They know.
Yeah.
And, it was perfect. They let me into the unit. The nurses were doing their handoff, so they weren't in the room. I got to sit with him for 15 minutes. He was, mumbling to himself, but not coherent and not interactive. Didn't seem aware that I was there when I talked to him. So I was able to say, like, "Dad, I love you. I forgive you. I hope you can forgive me, for any pain I caused. And I wish you peace. I know your mom's waiting for you on the other side." And it felt it felt really good to be able to say those things and just be with him and then let it go. I think I only stayed for 15 minutes and then realized that, like, that was what I needed. And so I, kissed him goodbye on the forehead and left, and got a text a couple hours later that he passed. And I think for me, the key piece of the story really is, it's the self-regulation piece. and recognizing what I do have control over, which is me and how I present to people, and what I don't have control over, which is a whole lot of the external stuff. And I can get myself wound up and I can yell at people or victimize myself or try to find other ways to try to control what's going on outside of me. But most of that actually creates the very thing that I'm trying to avoid. Yelling at people in the airport is not going to get me through faster.
Yeah.
And being kind and vulnerable did. And, that was a valuable lesson for me. It restored my faith in the human race. And it's something I try to bring into my coaching. Again, what can you control?
Thank you for sharing that story. And it brings up so many pieces. As you said, the self-regulating of it. So within, so without. If you, for whatever effect that you were able to have on the people around you, you got there by being regulated in yourself. There's a piece about requests and being able to make a sincere, well-placed request that's clear. Everyone rose to meet you on that. And also being able to have done the work to be able to meet your father in that moment in the way that you wanted. That gave you peace.
It was such a beautiful experience. And it was so rich with so many lessons. And as you reflected that back, what occurred to me was, the beauty of giving people agency, like being able to make a request and truly give the choice to the person sitting in front of you.
And also, what a gift, because you know what? They got to do a miraculous thing that
Yeah.
day. How lucky for them.
And there was a beautiful postscript. I actually was in for another flight like 3 months later. Same woman at the counter. And I got to thank her.
Oh, amazing.
And she cried and came out and gave me a hug.
Oh,
Yeah, it was awesome. It was awesome because every little interaction like that has ripples. And I don't always get to see how the ripples spread out. Every once in a while, I get a moment like that where I get to actually, you know, make the
what a
connection and
gift.
say, like, you made a difference for me. Like, I will remember you forever because of that one 15-second kind act.
And she's getting yelled at all day long.
Right. Yeah. I mean, like, you witness it all the time.
Yeah.
All the time. That is a thankless job. Having also worked as a bartender and, service person in the past, like anyone who's in public service, facing the general public, I always think of that.
It's important. Everyone has to have one of those jobs at least once in their life.
Right. So that you can recognize, like, hey, I know you're going through it most of the day. I just want you to know I see you.
Yeah.
And again, I think that highlights another important thing when I'm coaching leaders is like, make sure your people are seen. It's a human need. People want to be seen. They like to be understood too, but they just want to be seen and known that they're appreciated.
And you don't know what people are going through.
Right.
I'm curious because you talked about, the work you did in this journey.
Yep.
How did it change how you showed up with authority figures and feedback?
It's really fascinating to me. I can't explain it. And when I am now in front of male authority figures, there's no longer that internal drive of, I hope you like me. I hope I'm okay. Tell me I'm good enough. Like, it's evaporated. It's easy to make up that it's because my dad has passed and now that, that chapter is closed. Maybe it's because that was a corrective experience going to see him. I don't know.
Maybe it's that you know that you're enough and
Right.
you know that you're worthy.
Regardless of the why, I think it shows me the contrast of this is what an interaction, a professional interaction looks like when I don't have all my emotional baggage in the room.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't mean that I won't ask for feedback. I want feedback because I want to course
Sure.
correct. Like, feedback's
Yeah.
appropriate.
It's a gift.
But if I'm looking for emotional validation, it's probably not appropriate in my job. There are healthier ways for me to achieve that. And I think as a leader and coaching leaders, you really want to make sure that they have healthy boundaries around how they treat their employees, their direct reports. And like you said, like some of the older school directive leadership can be very abusive.
Yeah.
And it does not enhance performance. I think,
No, it doesn't work.
yeah, creating urgency is one thing, but the one of the things you see on t-shirts often in places like Hawaii is the old like pirate saying the beatings will continue until morale improves, and that doesn't work anymore. You have to meet
No, it
people where
really
they are.
doesn't.
You have to learn their style, and you need to learn to speak their language. There are lots of tools out there for that, where you can do the Myers-Briggs, or you can do any of the 4 quadrant models. There's Enneagram. There's a whole bunch of ways you can figure out who you are or how you present and how your people present. And then you can learn to speak their language. I jokingly call it the work love languages. Like, you figure out what their work love language is and you try to speak it because that's courteous.
Beautiful.
And actually, it's how you get that extra 10 to 15% of performance out of your people. Is it makes them feel comfortable and seen, and then they want to produce, as opposed to being afraid if they don't produce.
And have you met Gen Z? They're not going
Yes.
to put up with that for a minute.
No. Good for them.
Yeah. Yeah.
I was talking with a teacher a couple months back, and they were talking about like how they have like this little thing on the desk that's kind of like when you go to the Brazilian barbecues and they have the little thing that you turn over and one color means bring me meat and the other color means don't. Like, they have different colors that they can put on their desks. The teacher knows what the emotional state of the student is. And I had a really interesting reaction. My initial reaction was like, really? Like, that's a little, and then I
Suck
was
it
like,
up,
whoa,
crybabies.
that's my dad's voice. Like, that's not me. Like, wow, they're like, this educational system has become a source of teaching children how to recognize their emotions and how to self-manage. I'm like, wow, I wish I had had that in junior high and high school. Like, how powerful. So, we hear a lot about, oh, those Gen Z guys, they don't want to work and all of that. I hear that all the time, but like, in some ways, good for them. They know what they want, they know what they'll tolerate, and I think they're much more self-aware than my generation was at their age.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. They want to have purpose and meaning in their work. They want to know that you're asking them to do something that matters and has a reason and why. Yeah, they're not going to sit there and look busy to make someone happy.
No, and they're going to ask questions.
Yeah.
They want to know why, and that's good. We need more
So
of
get
that.
ready. The questions are coming.
Yep.
All right, Mike, where can people find you?
My personal email is probably the best way to get a hold of me right now. M as in Michael, J as in John, Shea, SHEA, 71 at gmail.com. Please reach out if you're interested in some coaching.
Mike Shea, thank you so much for doing this.
Thanks,
And
Julie.
thank you for being so vulnerable and telling this whole story.
My pleasure. Take care.
Bye. This has been Deep Work Out Loud. I'm Julie Harris Oliver. I'd like to thank Mike Shea for joining the podcast and telling that incredible story. And if any of this resonates with you, please subscribe, leave a review at all the podcast places. If you'd like to work with me, you can find me at julieharrisoliver.com. And let me leave you with this. What might it look like to start noticing your emotions and how your body feels in certain situations as you think about how do you want to show up in the world? Try some things. Report back. Thanks for listening. See you next time.